Texas in 1939, black people are subjected to extreme discrimination. They struggle to find decent accommodation and work. This young black boy named Bernard decides to open a shoe shining stand outside the International Bank. However, he only shines the shoes of wealthy white businessmen. He purposefully works slowly, so he could hear the financial strategies white people discussed as they wait, despite the fact that he only makes a small amount of money each day. When the men left, he writes down the important bits of their conversation in his notebook. He only truly wants the insightful financial information he heard from them. He has known from an early age that his lifelong ambition is to work in banking, even though he is black and knows it will be incredibly difficult. He almost got caught listening to them one day, so he hurries home and tells his father. His father then asks him what he thinks the white people would do if they found out he was listening to them. He reminds him of how young boys were executed for smaller crimes. When he was growing up, Bernard told him that all he wanted to do was learn how to make money. His father tries to crush his desire by telling him that it is impossible for him to succeed because he was born the wrong race. However, Bernard is adamant about succeeding against all odds. 15 years later, the adult Bernard now relocates to Los Angeles with his wife, Eunice, and their child. He chooses to launch his firm there because racial discrimination is less severe than it is back home in Texas. The three-person family is forced to reside in a rundown utility room owned by one of his relatives, who also tried to destroy his dream by telling him there aren't many black real estate agents in the area, and wants to know how he's going to pay his rent. Nevertheless, he assures his wife that they will soon move away. He begins by looking for residences for sale all across the city. As a real estate agent, he notices that the black community in Los Angeles is overcrowded. Through careful observation, while there are still numerous vacant homes in the white neighborhood, black individuals are financially capable and have renting demands, yet there is no market. This is a fantastic chance for those who want to get into the property business and rent out real estate. Bernard saw a white-owned apartment with weeds on the front door. It is not in great shape, but with his sharp eye for detail and use of the skills he picks up from all those white men, he recognized huge potential, especially given the property's location next to a black neighborhood. He goes to see Mr. Baker, the owner, and tells him that he is only renting out half of the apartment, so why not sell it to him. He promised to give him $30,000 immediately and an additional $5,000 after all the rooms are rented out. Even though Mr. Baker admires his idea, he doesn't want to engage in risky business. However, as he is about to leave, he takes a quick glance at the owner's calendar and notices that it was presented by a local bank manager. This gives him an idea. He says goodbye and immediately makes his way to the bank to meet the manager who provided the calendar. The manager's secretary, who discriminates against black people, refuses to introduce him to the manager. He waits outside the bank for a while before the manager finally emerges. He stops him right away and told him he knows one of his VIP clients, and he is hoping that the manager will approve a loan for him so he can continue his business because it will benefit him. However, the bank manager dismisses him without hesitation. He told him to make an appointment at the bank, knowingly that he won't get one because he is a black man. Was spending time with his family. He receives a call from Mr. Baker. He asks if he used his name to try to get a loan. He is forced to be honest and apologize. Strangely, Mr. Baker doesn't blame him, and instead respects his tenacity, his refusal to give up, and his readiness to go above and beyond to accomplish his goal. Bernard was taken aback when Mr. Baker informed him that he had agreed to guarantee the debt for him. He was instructed to visit the bank manager the next morning to obtain the first loan in his life in order to purchase the property. When an elderly white woman discovers Bernard, a black man, at her door after returning from shopping, she asks angrily, "What are you doing here?" Bernard responds calmly, "I'm refurbishing the apartment." She tells him to tell Mr. Baker that when he raises the rent again, he is not raising hers. Not knowing that Bernard is the new owner, Bernard informed her that when Mr. Baker sold him the property, he had informed him of her lease. The white lady became enraged by this. She told him he cannot buy this building because it's a white person building.
This is a white building. You can't own this place.
The old lady goes inside furiously. Soon after the police arrive, they told Bernard that an old lady called to complain that she doesn't like him working on the building and that he is impersonating the Mr. Baker. Since Bernard is a proactive thinker and anticipates events like this, he is ready in advance and takes out a copy of the real estate certificate. The cops concluded that he actually owned the building, so they left. Bernard goes back to the apartment complex that evening. When the elderly woman sees him at the door, she urges him to go since it is not the proper time for renovations, and he shouldn't be there after 6 o'clock in the evening. Bernard responded politely and calmly, saying that he is not renovating but rather is the owner and a tenant because he is moving in. The elderly woman is perplexed, and a few days later she irately vacates the building because she doesn't want to share a residence with black people. As the elderly woman is departing, a black lady is arriving to rent the apartment. As Bernard predicted, the black tenant market is indeed very large. As soon as the space is occupied, Bernard pays Mr. Baker the agreed upon follow-up payment as promised. Mr. Baker also sees an opportunity. He offers to start a business with Bernard because he respects Bernard's passion, determination, and sharp eye for detail in the real estate sector. They agree that Bernard would select the home and determine the income. Mr. Baker would then negotiate the deals and sign the contract. With him being the face of the business, white people won't know that they are doing business with black people, and they will split the revenue. Bernard is quick to agree a 50-50 split on their new venture. The two work together quite easily and start making lots of money. As Bernard promised his wife that one day he would give them a better life, he thought it was time he makes good on his promise. So he bought them a beautiful mansion and relocates from an apartment building. However, things take a sharp turn few years later when they told Bernard that his business partner has suddenly died. His wife inherited his equity in the company. With her, things won't go smoothly. Bernard now faces a new challenge. Because she has a terrible bias against black people and is unwilling to cooperate with Bernard, she offers to purchase Bernard's shares for a very small sum and threatens him with a lawsuit if he disagrees to sell to her. In those days when whites and blacks litigated, whites normally came out on top because of bias, but Bernard is unwilling to put up with such injustice. So he decides to take his chance in court. But he needed a witness to attest to the good relationship he had with Mr. Baker. He considers approaching the bank manager, but the manager has already sided with the widow and stays away from him. But this is not the first time Bernard has found himself with his back against the wall and must figure things out. He remained determined to succeed. Being incredibly dissatisfied, he stands inside the bank and analyzes the organized and well-kept structure. He sees signs of systematic discrimination everywhere. Just because he is black, when he enters the bank he is frequently scorned. As he continued to look around, the idea of owning the bank came to mind. He pitched the idea to Joe, another black real estate developer in Los Angeles. He explained to Joe that in one structure, there are 4 banks, and each of them has discriminated against black people. His brilliant idea is to purchase the property and watch to see who among them dares to treat him unfairly again. He asks Joe if he wants to be his business partner. Joe initially believes he is crazy, because the buildings is so expensive, and no black person has ever purchased land in downtown Los Angeles. But after talking about it for a bit, Joe realizes that Bernard is a smart rationalist, rather than a man with delusions. Bernard wants to purchase this structure. Because the bank will service him as long as he owns the building, they dare not refuse to grant him a loan. In order for his real estate firm to run more smoothly, they will also inform him on the current real estate trends. Joe is surprised by his proposal, but after giving it some thought, he is confident that it will succeed. Despite his immense fortune, he is still a target for white people everywhere. He will gain more money if he can step on white bankers on white soil, though they are still unable to directly negotiate business deals with white people. As a result, they require a white agent. Bernard already has a plan in mind for Matt, who has been assisting him with renovations. Matt is an honest person, and he is very ambitious though he lacks experience. They see him as a perfect candidate. Bernard and Joe decided to give Matt a thorough education, teaching him real estate maths, golf, and formal manners. Matt exceeds expectations, and develops his golfing skills quickly. He can perform real estate values while playing golf, just like a budding business person. Joe sets up a meeting and Matt meets the owner of the bank building. At a golf club, the discussion goes well. Matt is given the opportunity to purchase the property, and the remaining negotiation will be worked out. But Matt is unsure about how to proceed. Bernard assists Matt with all the preparations before the negotiation. He counts how many lights are on in the building after dark, determines the building's vacancy rate, and then estimates the building's value, using its annual revenue and operating expenses. Before meeting with the owner, Bernard gets ready and gives him any numbers he would need to ask Matt to memorize. Because of this, no matter how the boss bluffs about his property, Matt always thinks ahead and provides the precise number, shocking the big boss.
That would be a net income of
$245,592, but that's unimportant. I mean, if you want to show me your leases and prove it, okay, otherwise I'd call it 15 cents a square.
Alongside him, an accountant is likewise perplexed. They all believe they have come across a math genius and are completely incapable of deceiving him. The asking price of the property was about $2.4 million. They got it for just $1.56 million. After that, every bank's president will approach Bernard to shake his hand whenever he enters or exits the building. The small manager who previously gave him a difficult time is shocked. The banking industry helps Bernard and Joe, and their real estate careers grow quickly. They deliberately break Los Angeles' rigid zoning laws, prohibiting black and white segregation. They even got received by the president. Many young talented black people relocate to white communities soon after. Later, in 1963, Bernard returns with his family to Texas to see his father. After dinner he tells Bernard he's pleased of his accomplishments. The following day Bernard and his son go for a trip around town, and before they know it, they are in front of the bank, where Bernard used to work as a shoeshine boy. Back then Texas was America's most racist state. They run into a young child who is doing the same thing Bernard did when he was younger, shining shoes. Bernard was shocked to learn that the boy solely shines white people's shoes. Bernard is affected by this small encounter and is made aware of his obligation to treat others with respect. He decides in secret that he must alter the current situation and aid the black people in his hometown by obtaining better homes. The following day, Bernard comes to see Joe and suggests that they purchase the Texas Mainland Bank. Because of the extreme racism in Texas, once again, Joe believes Bernard is insane for even considering it, but Bernard is able to provide convincing justifications for the purchase. Joe ultimately decides to assist Bernard, and they rehire Matt as their front man. They meet with Robert Florence Sr. and Jr., the bank's owners, to go over the financial details. Despite Florence Jr.'s fears that his father is selling the bank to Matt and his colleagues, Bernard acquires the Mainland Bank. Bernard gets to work and begins assisting the local African Americans in being accepted for loans and perhaps career prospects. Before Florence Jr. begins looking into the loans that their bank allows, everything seems to be going smoothly. Florence follows Matt one day and comes across Bernard and Joe. He challenges them on the loans they approved and issues a letter from the U.S. Treasury Department as punishment. The letter states that in a month's time, the department will examine the bank's activities. The boys talked about their next steps after Florence Jr. left. Matt makes a recommendation during that moment. He recommends that they purchase a different bank and move the problematic debts from the mainland to that new bank. When they talked about buying another bank, Bernard thinks the primary issue is controlling the bank's operations, because initially everything seemed to be going well until Florence Jr. began looking into the loans. Matt suggested he be given the opportunity to lead the new bank. Bernard voices his opposition to the notion, but he ultimately decides to allow him with a bit of supervision. In the end, Matt is able to manage his bank just how he desired. The following day, Matt meets with a lawyer and begins executing loan agreements in his direction. Later, Matt gets a call from Florence Jr. regarding customers who wish to transfer all their funds to the mainland. Adding insult to injury, a federal bank examiner visits Matt to assist him. Bernard forced himself to wear a janitor's uniform in order to get close during the meeting and obtain information. Sadly, it makes little difference because examiner finds serious issue with multiple loans. Bernard finds it unbelievable that the ridiculous loans were granted. They eventually discovered that Florence Jr. had been doing it all along. It turns out that in his haste to run his bank, Matt ignored procedures and hired a lawyer that Florence suggested, which allowed Florence to slip in the dubious loans. Later, Bernard and Joe advise Matt that leaving the Bank of Marlin is the most sensible course of action. Unwilling to let his bank go, Matt makes a decision without informing his partners. Matt follows McClellan's suggestions and testifies against his partners at the Senate hearing the next day. Later that day, Bernard also meets with McClellan and listens to his proposal. He gives him a choice to take an immunity deal and confirm Matt's testimonies, or he can say whatever he wants and go to jail in the end. But Bernard decides to say the words that have been kept in his heart for years. He talks about racial discrimination in the country.
Are created equal. An endeavor to create a society where citizens receive the equal protection of our laws. But we all know, for many citizens, it's a lie. But I think it's really about how on earth did two black men pull off owning a bank in Texas? It's scary.
Shortly after that, both Bernard and Joe's fortunes got decimated after the hearing. The two also got sentenced to federal prison. Florence Jr. purchased the Mainland Bank for a little portion of what Bernard and Joe paid for it. Matt was never charged with any crimes. Bernard and Joe were released from jail several years later. Eunice thinks it odd that the two guys appear content despite losing everything. It transpires that is not at all the case. Joe reveals that they had bought houses in the Bahamas close to one another. Eunice asks Bernard how that occurred in shock. It turns out that Bernard was the person who called the night before his testimony. He apologized to Bernard and informed him of the senator's deal. Before the authorities could seize their possessions, Bernard begged Matt for a favor in exchange. The movie concludes with the revelation that Bernard and Joe still own two mansions next to each other in the Bahamas, and at the height of their business they own over 177 residential properties with multiple rooms, which were crucial to the struggle against housing discrimination in LA. That concludes the movie The Banker. Please like and subscribe for more content. Thanks for watching.